Hi guys, welcome to News in 30 minutes. So before we get on with the important issues on the 22nd January 2024, today was an auspicious day as it was the day when the consecration of Ram idol in Ayodhya took place, which is a very culturally significant event that happened in the country. So Jai Shri Ram to each and every one of my users. So what we have to take from this is not just a celebration but the inculcation of the values that Lord Ram brings as an example to every human being. It can be from the lines of sacrifices, it can be from the lines of commitment, it also can be from the lines of sincerity and genuinity. Okay, all this while discharging one's duty. So this is something that we have to imbibe and inculcate within our lives as well. So I hope along with the celebration we try to inculcate the values that are enshrined within the Ramayana by the deity Rama. So with that, let us start off with news in 30 minutes and look at some of the important issues on the 22nd January 2024. The first issue is NISAR mission is on track for the early 2024 launch. So what is NISAR mission? As the name suggests, it's NASA ISRO synthetic aperture radar mission. Okay, so it's a NASA ISRO synthetic aperture radar mission. Okay, so as you know, it's radar, so the main use is radio waves. Okay, it mainly uses the radio waves. Okay, now let us now dwell in depth of what is this NISAR mission, because the questions can come from prelims perspective. You have to know about this. As the name, as the here can see the explanation that NISAR mission is basically to observe natural processes and changes in the Earth's complex systems. So you should understand that it is to observe the natural processes and changes in the Earth's complex systems. So what is this natural process and changes in the Earth's complex system? Let me just elaborate more on this. One, it can be used for forest management. That is one. The second, it can be used for agricultural monitoring. That is two. The third is it can be also used to monitor ice mass. It can be also used in order to monitor sea level rise, ground water, and it can also be used to monitor natural hazards such as earthquakes, landslides, tsunamis, and volcanoes. Okay, look at this. These are all some of the applications of NISAR mission. Okay, now these applications are pretty generic. So more or less whatever they give in the statements of prelims, you can more or less take it as it will be correct when it comes to application, because the applications are very wide. There are very less chances that they can ask something that is outside the scope of this mission. Okay, so this is regarding the applications. Now let us get into some technicalities of what is this NISAR mission. Now, as I told you, NISAR mission is basically monitoring the Earth's natural processes. Now, apart from that, the technical aspect is one, the NISAR mission will have a 3-year mission life. It will have a 3-year mission life. The next is whatever data that we receive from this mission is it goes into something called open science and open data policy. So whatever we try to capture from this NISAR mission will be available for all scientists in order to interpret as well as use in their studies and theories. So that is another important thing. Now this NISAR mission will have two payloads. It will have two payloads. One will be the long wavelength band, okay, which is known as L band. Long wavelength band, which is known as L band. The second is short wavelength band, which is known as S band. Okay, now this L band is given by USA, that is NASA, and this S band is given by India, that is ISRO. So this is the collaboration between USA and India. Okay, the next is Now this NISAR mission, as you know, it carries something called synthetic aperture radar. Okay, and the synthetic aperture radar can scan the Earth's land and ice. It can scan the Earth's land and ice, and it will scan this Earth's land and ice twice every 12 days. Twice every 12 days in ascending phase as well as descending phase. Okay, in ascending phase and descending phase. In both the phases, that is, if this is Earth, in the ascending phase also it will scan, and in the descending phase also it will scan. As you know, this NISAR mission is launched in low Earth orbit. The reason why it is launched in low Earth orbit is the mission basically is remote sensing. Okay, it is monitoring different aspects of the Earth system, so we can say that the mission is remote sensing, and any remote sensing will always be present in the low Earth orbit, and it goes from poles to poles. So it will have an ascending as well as a descending passes. So this ascending and descending can be used in order to scan. So it will scan twice every 12 days in ascending and descending passes. So that is another aspect of NISAR mission. Another aspect of NISAR mission is it is capable of, okay, it is capable of penetrating, cloud cover, and it will operate both day and night. It operates both day and night. The reason is because it depends on radio waves. It can operate both on day and night. If it is on visible optics, then it couldn't have been operating in the night, but because it is on radio waves spectrum, it can operate both on day and night. It can penetrate cloud cover, hence the remote sensing becomes very effective. Okay, so to just summarize, one, the application of NASA ISRO synthetic aperture radar mission is broadly to observe the natural processes and changes in the Earth's complex systems. The observation happens in the spectrum of radio waves, and these are some of the applications such as forest management, agricultural monitoring, ice mass, sea level rise, groundwater, national hazards like earthquakes, landslides, tsunamis and volcanoes. The next is it has a 3-year mission life. All the data comes under open science and open data policy. There are two payloads, one is L-band, another is S-band. L-band payload is by NASA, whereas S-band payload is by ISRO. The synthetic aperture radar can scan the Earth's land and ice twice every 12 days in the ascending and descending phases. Okay. The next is it is present in the low Earth orbit because broadly it is remote sensing the Earth, and it can sense or scan both day and night, and it can penetrate deep cloud cover, hence the remote sensing will be effective even on cloudy days. So this is the NISAR mission between NASA and ISRO, and the launch will be in the early 2024. So there are very high chances that by the time you write prelims, the launch would have taken place, and there are high chances that the question can come on this mission. So if you take space is a very, very important theme in prelims as well as mains. So in space, there are a lot of things that have happened. Aditya L1 mission, there is Chandrayaan that has taken place. Then there is XPOSat. Okay, this is X-ray polarized satellite, and now the next upcoming is NISAR mission. So these are broadly some of the missions where India has played a very critical role. So you should have very good understanding between these missions, because one question is definitely going to come on this particular space missions. Okay, so be ready on that. So with that, the first issue of the day is done. So I hope it was helpful. Let us go on to the next issue. The next issue is, are antibiotics overprescribed in India? Okay, the answer is yes. It is yes. The reason is because, look at this, 55% of the patients surveyed were prescribed antibiotics as prophylaxis or as a preventive. Prophylaxis means prevention. Okay, you are prescribing something as a means of prevention, then it becomes prophylaxis. So 55% of the patients surveyed were prescribed antibiotics as prophylaxis, and only 45% were prescribed antibiotics to actually treat infections. And out of that 45%, only 6% were prescribed after identifying a specific bacteria. This shows that we are over prescribing antibiotics. Okay, now look at this. The National Center for Disease Control, recently found that over half of the nearly 10,000 hospital patients surveyed for the study were given antibiotics to prevent rather than treat infection. That is why they told that over 55% of the patients were given antibiotics as a means of prophylaxis, as a means of prevention rather than to treat infection, which is very unfortunate. Okay, now obviously I will not go into the challenges, I will not go into the solutions, because we are there in the prelims mode. These things will not become so important as of now. So what I will concentrate more is, there is something called AWARE, AWARE. Okay, this is AWARE is a program that is developed by WHO. Okay, AWARE is a program that's developed by WHO, and in this today, in the newspapers, it is widely coming that India is among the nations. That have overused watch group antibiotics. Okay, so this is something that is important from prelims perspective. That is why you should learn this properly. Now, what is this AWARE program by WHO? Okay, understand that this AWARE program by WHO is based on the impact of different antibiotics on antimicrobial resistance. Okay, it is based on the impact of different antibiotics based on the antimicrobial resistance, so that the antibiotics are used appropriately. I hope you understood this. Okay, so the antibiotics are used appropriately. Now let me elaborate what this means. Okay, but overall they can just give you a statement. AWARE program is one by WHO, correct. The second statement is they are done, or the AWARE program is done on the basis of the impact of different antibiotics on antimicrobial resistance. This categorization of the antibiotics on the basis of impact, because antibiotics can be used appropriately, is what is AWARE program. Okay, I will again repeat: the categorization of antibiotics on the basis of the impact of those antibiotics on AMR. The categorization of antibiotics on the basis of the impact of different antibiotics on antimicrobial resistance. This is what is called as the AWARE program. Okay, now let me elaborate. If I elaborate, you will get to know. Now, categorization of antibiotics are basically on three types. There are three types of antibiotics. One is the antibiotics that are put under access group. The second is the antibiotics that are put under the watch group, and the third is the antibiotics that are put under the reserve group. Okay, now the categorization is done in such a way that, see, this should be of maximum usage and this should be of minimum usage. I hope you are understanding this. See, access, watch, reserve. This categorization of antibiotics into these three types is on the basis of the impact of different antibiotics on antimicrobial resistance. Okay, so again I am telling, AWARE program is nothing but categorization of antibiotics, and this categorization of antibiotics is done on the basis of the impact of those antibiotics on antimicrobial resistance. Okay, so the categorization is of three types: access, watch, and reserve. Access, watch, and reserve. So what is this access, watch, and reserve? Now let us look at it. If you look at access group, it is the most used group, and it basically minimizes. By using this, you are minimizing the potential. You are minimizing the potential for resistance. Okay, and this is the basic group of antibiotics that you have to use during infection, and whenever you use this, it minimizes the potential for resistance. The next is watch group. Now this group should be used only for specific and limited use. Okay, it should be used only for specific and limited use. Okay, now the reason why it should be used for specific and limited use is there are very high chances of increased antimicrobial resistance. Hence, we have to use it very carefully. The last is reserve group. Okay, now if you take the reserve group should be only used in life-threatening. It can be only used in life-threatening conditions. Okay, because the result can be very high potential. Okay, very high potential for developing antimicrobial resistance. Okay, so I hope you understood why the antibiotics are segregated into these three groups. Okay, so this entire segregation is what they call as the AWARE program of WHO. Okay, now look at this statement again. India is among nations that has overused watch group antibiotics. Okay, so now I think it will make sense. India among nations that have overused watch group antibiotics. If you come back to this, look at this. This is the watch group antibiotics, which should be used for specific and limited use because there are very high chances of developing antimicrobial resistance. But unfortunately, it is here that India has overused. Now, let me just give you a stat that will prove it. According to WHO, okay, 60% of the total antibiotics in a country, 60% of the total antibiotics in a country should come from access group. Okay, this is the ideal scenario. 60% of the total antibiotics used in a country should come from access group. But in India, the case is reversed. In India, 60% of the antibiotics used is coming from watch group. So this is why the WHO is skeptical, and this is why even the National Center for Disease Control in India is also worried that we are overusing our antibiotics for more than bacterial infection for prevention. That is the problem. The problem is we are prescribing the antibiotics not for bacterial infection but as a means of prevention, and this has to stop. So this is what is the entire scenario. As I told you, we are more concerned about what is this AWARE program, on what basis is this particular categorization of antibiotics done, and what are the three categories of antibiotics. So these three are the three important information that is important for your exam, especially your prelims exam. Okay, so this is about this issue. Let us go to the last issue of the day. The last issue is more from the mains perspective, but it is very important. You never know, they can ask you about this acts even in prelims. Now, the Post Office Act, its unbridled power of interception. Okay, the newly enacted act does not make any provision for procedural safeguards to dispel fears of misuse of substantive provisions of interception. So the author here is skeptical about the powers given to the government regarding the interception of messages that move through the post offices. Okay, so that is what the author is skeptical. The reason why the author is skeptical is the author gives scenarios of different legislations. And in this legislations, the author substantiates by telling how the government has been very, very lethargic in implementing safeguards, and the same lethargic attitude can also be reflected in this Post Office Act as well. That is the entire viewpoint of the author. So first let us talk about the three legislations, and then let us get into what is the problem regarding the Indian Post Office Act 2023, which was enacted receiving the President assent. Okay, so the first act that the author talks about is the recently passed Telecommunications Act. The recently passed Telecommunications Act 2023. Okay. Now first, from prelims angle, you should know that this Telecommunication Act 2023 will replace two acts. One is the Indian Telegraph Act 1885, that is one. The second, it will replace the Indian Wireless Telegraph Act 1933. So these are the two acts that will be replaced by the Telecommunication Act 2023. Okay. Now the point here is section 20 of the Telecommunication Act gives the power of interception. It gives the power of interception, plus it allows the union government to take precautions or to establish procedural safeguards for stopping any type of misuse of this interception. Because as you know, telecommunication can resolve, telecommunication means you can also create phone tapping. Phone tapping is one type of interception. Okay, so we cannot allow such phone tapping to happen without any type of procedural safeguards. So section 20 of this will provide interception. It will provide the power of interception. Okay, however, it also provides the union government precautions and procedural safeguards to stop misuse of interception. Okay, but why is the author skeptical? Is the author is skeptical because, see, there was Indian Telegraph Act. Okay, there was Indian Telegraph Act, and in this Indian Telegraph Act there was section 5 which provided the power of interception. Okay, and section 7 of 2, it provided the power of the central government providing procedural safeguards. Okay, now this interception was used by the government, but this procedural safeguards to prevent the misuse, was completely neglected. This provision was completely neglected. It was neglected up to what point? Look at this. The act came in 1885, but look, for how long section 7 was neglected? Up to what you call as PUCL versus Union of India case 1996. In this case, it was the Supreme Court that held the procedural safeguards. Okay, it was the Supreme Court that came up with the procedural safeguards for this 1885 Telegraph Act. Okay, it was the Supreme Court that actually brought into life the procedural safeguards that was actually meant to be prescribed by the union government, which it did not happen. Okay, and this happened from 1996. And from 1996 to 2007, the guidelines prescribed by the Supreme Court acted as the procedural safeguards. From 2007, the government then enacted rules under the Telegraph Act, and this rules, okay, was then used as procedural safeguards. Okay, so two things come here. One, what you should understand is, here it shows the lack of bureaucratic activism in making sure that there is no misuse of the provision. That is the first thing. The second is, it shows the judicial activism. Okay, so on one side you see the judicial activism. The judiciary is trying to make sure that whichever provision was neglected is activated via its rule in PUCL versus Union of India case 1996. PUCL is, the full form is People's Union on Civil Liberties. Okay, PUCL means People's Union of Civil Liberties. So People's Union on Civil Liberties versus Union of India case 1996, it was the judiciary, the Supreme Court, that activated the section 7 by enumerating the guidelines for the procedural safeguards of interception under Indian Telegraph Act. Until then, the government had neglected the procedural safeguards and was making use of only the provision of interception. So this shows the lack of accountability on the part of the government, and that is why the author feels that though section 20 of Telecommunication Act provides both the power of interception as well as the power of creating procedural safeguards, the government may use the power of interception, but the government may neglect this procedural safeguards. So this is the first scenario that the author tells why the author is skeptical about the government's misuse of the power of interception. Okay, let us go to the next act that the author will take as an example. The next act the author takes is IT Act 2000, the Information and Technology Act, Information and Telecommunication Act 2000, IT Act 2000. Okay, now this act is basically regulating the electronic media. Okay, it's regulating the electronic media. Okay, now here we have something called section 69 of 1. You have section 69 of 1. This section 69 of 1 also provides for interception. It also provides for interception. Okay, but the author says that this section 69, though it provides for interception, this section does not have any necessary requirements. It does not have any necessary requirements unlike Telegraph Act. What does this mean? This means that in Telegraph Act you have some words like public emergency, okay, or you have words like in the interest of public safety. Okay, so these words are not there in IT Act. So the necessary requirements itself are not there in IT Act. So one section 69 will provide for interception, and this power of interception is much wider. The power of interception is much wider in the IT Act compared to the Telegraph Act. That is the first point. The power of interception in the IT Act is much wider compared to the Telegraph Act. The second is section 69(1) also provides for procedural safeguards. It also provides for procedural safeguards so that there should not be any misuse of the interception. However, though the Act came in 2000, the procedural safeguards, the Act came in 2000, the procedural safeguards came in 2009. Look at it. There is a huge gap between the Act and the procedural safeguards. Okay. Again, that shows that bureaucratic activism is missing in order to create safeguards or rules to prevent the misuse of interception in any act. This is again a problem that we have observed in the bureaucracy. Okay, so with the same attitude, if you look at the next act, that is the recently passed bill, that is Indian Post Act 2023. The author tells that here the first thing is the act makes interception more liberal. It makes interception more liberal. And the second is it again removes those safety nets like public emergency, okay, as well as public interest. It removes these safety net. So there is no safety net like this. The third is it again provides the bureaucracy. There is no provision for procedural safeguards at all. The next is there is no provisions for procedural safeguards. Okay, now all these three, one, it is making interception more liberal. The safety net like public emergency and public interest are removed, and there is no provision or provisions of procedural safeguards. This again gives wide scope for the government to intercept. It gives wide scope for the government to intercept the messages. Okay, not only this, there is no safeguard for misuse of interception. So these are the three scenarios or the three legislations that the author tells, and because the government has that record, if you take from the Telegraph Act to the IT Act to the now Telecommunication Act to the Indian Post Act, if you look at the record of the bureaucracy in the activism and accountability of the bureaucracy in creating the procedural safeguards, it has always been very low. It has always been very lethargic, and on that basis, the author says that the Post Office Act is unbridled powers of interception. Okay, now it makes sense if you say the newly enacted Act does not make any provision for procedural safeguards to dispel fears of misuse of substantive provisions of interception. So taking the three legislations, that is the Telecommunications Bill, the IT Act and the Indian Post Office Act, this author gives different scenarios where the bureaucracy has been skeptical in enacting procedural safeguards and to prevent the misuse of interception. Okay. However, you have to know the Telecommunication Act, which has been passed recently, the important provisions. The IT Act, obviously, you should know because it has always been in use because of the use of those powers in order to censor, in order to ban internet, or in order to make sure that there is a type of closure of internet in specific areas which is having some type of turbulence. The next is the new act, that is Indian Post Office Act. So these three acts and important provisions are important from prelims perspective as well as mains perspective. So it is necessary for you to just create around 5 to 8 points on all these three acts and keep it. Okay. So with that, these are some of the important acts that are there in news. The last is the important cases of Supreme Court regarding right to privacy. Okay. Where one is, as I already told, PUCL versus Union of India. Okay, PUCL versus Union of India, 1996. Here, the government says that phone communication is intimate and it is private and confidential. It says phone communication is intimate and private and confidential, and this phone communication, phone tapping, and hence phone tapping should not be done, and phone tapping is an infringement. Phone tapping is an infringement of Article 19, and if phone tapping has to be done, then it can only be done within Article 19 of 2 that provides reasonable restrictions. To Article 19. So I hope you understood this People's Union on Civil Liberties versus Union of India case 1996. It has told that phone tapping is an infringement of Article 19, and if phone tapping has to be done, it has to be done within the procedures established by law, and that too inside the ambit of Article 19 of 2, which provides reasonable restrictions for our freedom of speech and expression. That is the first act. The second is the Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India case 2017. Now here it said that right to communication comes under right to privacy, and right to privacy comes under Article 21 of Indian Constitution that protects the right to life and liberty. Okay, so this is right to communication, which is part of right to privacy, comes under Article 21 of the Constitution. Okay, these are the important Supreme Court cases that talks about the right to privacy. Okay, also you should know that India is a signatory of International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. India is a signatory of International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, 1966. And in this Article 17 of this International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 17 of this talks about unlawful interference of privacy is prohibited. Again, in short, Article 17 upholds the right to privacy. Article 17 upholds the right to privacy. Okay, so these are the cases as well as one event which specifies or which upholds the right to privacy in India. So we have discussed the Telecommunication Bill, the IT Act as well as the Indian Post Office Act, and how they can infringe the right to privacy, and why the government or the bureaucracy must have procedural safeguards that should protect the right to privacy and prevent any type of misuse of interception within these acts. Okay, with that, today's issues of the day are done. I hope you enjoyed the issues. If you have enjoyed the issues, please like, share and subscribe, guys. Okay, again wishing you all a very very happy and a very very inaugurative Ram temple. I hope everyone is in celebratory mode. Use that energy into your preparation as well, and make sure that you spread positiveness. Okay, with that, I'm going to see you tomorrow. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.